Hey everybody, thanks for joining me. Today, we're going to build this direct heat smoker. I'm going to take you step by step, show you exactly how I build it. So, come and join me. If you haven't already, please like the channel and subscribe. In the back of my truck, I have a full sheet of 3/16 inch steel plate that I'm going to use for the main body and the lid. So to make it more manageable, I'm going to start breaking it down right off the back of my truck. Now the dimensions of the box is going to be 24 inches wide, 18 inches in depth, and the height will be 25 inches. This does not include the lid. On the bottom of the box, I'm going to cut two pieces at 24 inches by 18 inches. This will be for the insulated bottom. Now that I have all the pieces broken down for the main box, I'm going to make sure it's square. I'm going to tack it all together. Then I'll finish welding it out. The welder I'm using today is the YesWelder NP200. I'm using 035 solid wire, and the gas I'm using is 7525. For the lid, my plan is to use 2-inch by 1-inch C-channel. That's going to be for the sides of the lid. And then I'll use a piece of the 3/16 inch steel on top and also in the front, because I'm going to make a lip coming down so it's easier to access the food, which I'll show you in a little bit. With all the C-channel cut up, I'm going to line it up, tack it together, make sure it's nice, square, and tight against the box. At this point, I only had 3 sides tacked together. Next thing I need to do is cut the front of the box for the front lip that comes down off the lid. The plasma cutter I'm using is my YesWelder CT2050. The plasma cutter did a great job cutting through this 3/16 of an inch steel. I needed to run out and get 1-inch flat bar to help finish with the lid, so I decided to jump over and start welding the bottom of the main box together. The insulation I'm using is 1.5 inches thick of ceramic insulation. So when I tacked in the inside bottom, I made sure I gave plenty of space for the insulation. Once the inside bottom was tacked in place, I welded it up to get ready for the insulation. I next got the insulation, laid it in place. I used a utility knife and made sure I cut all the edges and make sure it was a nice tight fit. With the insulation in, I grabbed the bottom, lined it up, and started tacking it in place. As always, if you have any questions about today's project or tools used today, if you have any suggestions on a future project, please let me know in the comments below. With the bottom tacked into place, I started welding everything up. Here what I'm doing is I'm measuring out for the front door. I'm making all my measurements. I'm keeping in mind how thick the bottom is with the insulated bottom. and I'm making the marks for where I want to cut the door out. I miss recording the door opening, but here what I'm doing with the grinder is I'm cutting out for the actual door itself. I cleaned up the metal, I lined it up, lined up the bolt hinges, and now I'm going to tack it in place, then I'll weld it in once I make sure that everything's lined up and opening correctly. Alright, once I picked up the 1-inch flat bar, I was able to get back and start working on the lid again. What I'm using the 1-inch flat bar for is I'm going to weld it in place at a 90-degree angle on top of the box, and this will meet up with the C-channel, so it makes a nice tight fit when the lid is closed. I'm going to tack it in, I'm going to weld it up, then I'm going to get the grinder and I'm going to smooth it all out, make it nice and round, nice and tight, so the lid fits flush. I'm going to repeat this step on the whole entire top of the box. On the front, I did something slightly different with the 1-inch flat bar. I cut out the bottom portion to give plenty of room for the grate to be installed and removed. With this completed and the sides of the lid completed, now I'm going to cut some of the 3/16 inch steel. I'm going to cover the front and the top of the lid. With those two pieces cut out, I'm going to line it up on the lid, tack it up, and weld it all up. The next thing I decided to work on was to get the smoker off the ground. I'm going to build the base out of 1.5-inch tubing. I'm using 3-inch casters, with the front being locking casters. My goal is to have the cooking grate 38 inches off the ground. With all the pieces cut, I'm going to make sure it's square. I'm going to tack it together and weld it up. Next, I'm going to weld the casters on. With the casters welded on, it's time to flip it over and weld up the uprights. These uprights are cut perfectly to give my cooking grate the exact height of 38 inches, what I was looking for. So I'm going to tack them in, make sure they're square, weld it up. Next thing to do is line it up and weld it to the bottom of the smoker. Once the bottom is all welded up, it's just a matter of flipping it upright. The smoker at this point does have a pretty good amount of weight to it, but it wasn't too bad. The casters glide real well. It's really easy to move around, and the locking casters work really well. Now it's time to start working on the cooking grate itself. I'm using 3/4 inch angle iron, and for the grate itself, I'm using expanded steel. I squared up my corners, attacked it in place, and welded it up. Next thing I did was I cut out the expanded steel for the cooking grate and also for the storage area on the bottom of the smoker. I lined up the expanded metal to the frame I made. I spot welded each section where it touched the frame. For the expanded steel for the bottom storage area, I had to notch out the corners. But then after that, I lined it up and I spot welded each section that was touching the side rails. To hold my cooking grate, I am using 1.5" angle iron. I am lining it up so the grate sits completely flush to the top of the opening of the smoker. Next thing I'm going to work on is a door latch. I am going to cut off a piece of 3/16 inch steel. I got the idea of this type of latch from Chud's Barbecue. Bradley has a great YouTube channel and he's definitely worth checking out. I'm using a piece of 3/4 inch steel to space off the notching system, and I'm going to tack it in place. While designing this direct heat smoker, did a lot of research. One thing I wanted to try to do is to also be able to use this as an offset smoker. To accomplish this, I'm going to use 1/4 inch plate steel. I'm going to cut it down so it fits inside the smoker. I'm going to use 3/4 inch angle iron, and I'm going to mount it right above the firebox door. The plan is to do a side vent, do 2 of these 1/4 inch plates, leaving a gap on the right hand side, allowing the airflow to come across the bottom and be directed into that opening. And on top, I'm going to have 2 stacks. I'm going to close the right vent, leave the left open, and hopefully create a reverse flow smoker. And what I'm doing here right now is cutting out for those 2 vents I just got done telling you about. The vents themselves are 4x4 square tubing, and they're approximately 4 inches high. Alright, I'm lining up the 4x4 stacks and I'm tacking it in place. Once I'm happy, I'm going to weld it up. I'm using a step bit to drill out for both thermostats. I'm going to have one on the left, one on the right. I'm going to work on the handle for the lid right now. So I have 2 pieces of 3/16 inch steel sandwiched together. I drew a radius on the one side, and I am now using my grinder here to form that radius. And I have them pinched together to try to get them exactly the same. Once I'm done rounding this off, I'm going to drill holes to handle the 9/16 round bar I'm going to use. Alright, so here I line up the tabs I made. I have them nice and square. I'm going to tack them in place. Then I'm going to use 2 pieces of the 9/16 round bar, about 4 inches in length. Then I'm going to sleeve the round bar with hollow tube, and this will create my handle for my smoker lid. Okay, we're getting close to the end of the build. Next thing to do is to build a damper for the two smokestack vents on top. So I'm going to cut out 2 squares out of 1/8 inch steel plate. I'm using a screw and tension spring in order to hold the dampers in place. For the vent for the side of the smoker, I'm going to use a slide system. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to cut out a piece 3/4 of an inch by 14 inch 3/16 steel, and a piece 1/2 inch by 14 inches by 1/8 inch steel. I'm going to weld these 2 pieces together to form a track. I'm going to do this for the top and the bottom. I am then going to use a piece of 1/8 inch steel 4 inches by 12 inches, and that'll fit inside the track. On the outside of the smoker, I marked 3 holes. I'm going to use a 2-inch hole saw bit. I'm going to drill out my holes for my vents. In order to open and close the vent, I am going to use a handle of a chipping hammer. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to drill a small hole either side of the center vent hole, and this allows the handle to fit into those holes, depending on whether the vent is open or closed. With the outside holes done, I'm going to line up my bottom track, tack it in place. I'm then going to take the 4x12 1/8 inch plate. I'm going to set it in the bottom track. I'm going to take the top track, put it on top, and then tack that in place as well. On the edges of the 1/8 inch steel plate, I did sand it down with a flap disc to try to smooth it out and thin it out slightly so it'll slide nice in the track. Once everything is tacked in place, I clamp down the center slide in the open position, and then I drilled out 2 of the holes. The way I designed this, when it's in fully open, I only had to drill out 2 holes. After that, I welded in the chipping hammer handle so I can open and close the vent. And there you have it, all the welding is done. Next thing to do is to season the smoker. So in order to season it, I'm going to use linseed oil on the outside to protect the outside of the smoker. To season the inside, I'm going to use cooking spray oil. I'm going to show you how I did that now. First thing I did was take the kitchen spray oil and spray everything inside. I then lit a fire using charcoal and also wood, and my goal was to get the temperature as high as possible. The next thing I did was to wipe down the whole entire outside with linseed oil. And then with a propane torch, I proceeded to burn the outside, cooking the linseed oil to the outside of the smoker, getting it nice and hot. I repeated this process with the linseed oil about 4 to 5 times until I was happy with the outside coat. This is a warning. You do have to be careful of the rags you use for the linseed oil. If you know anything about linseed oil, while the rags are still wet, it could self-combust. So make sure you put these rags somewhere safe until they dry out. So with the seasoning done, next thing to do is let's cook something. So what I have here is I have a pork belly. I'm going to coat all sides of the pork belly with a pork rub I came up with. I'm going to make sure I get rub on all sides, including the sides of the pork belly. Then what I'm going to do is I'm going to fire up the direct heat smoker. My goal temperature is going to be between 250 and 275. Once the charcoal is ready, I'm going to place the charcoal right in the center, right above where the meat's going to be sitting in the rack. I'm only going to use charcoal, and the drippings from the pork belly are what's going to smoke and season the meat. Once the pork belly is at around 150 to 160 degrees, I'm going to take the pork belly, flip it over on the other side. I did make a mopping sauce using my favorite barbecue sauce. I added some white vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and a little bit of brown sugar and mixed it up to create my mopping sauce. I used the mopping sauce about every half hour until I got to my desired temperature of around 200 to 203 degrees. Once I got my desired temperature, I took it off the smoker. I let it rest, then I shredded it like a pulled pork sandwich. The pork belly turned out absolutely amazing. The smoker, it worked perfect. It held temperature great. I was able to create higher heat when I wanted to, or I was able to maintain temperature exactly where I wanted. So there you have it. I hope you enjoyed this video on the direct heat smoker. If you have not already, please like the channel and subscribe. I'll see you on the next video.